Hello and welcome to The Curator on Monocle Radio with me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Over the next 60 minutes, I'll be bringing some of the very best interviews and reports from the past week of coverage on Monocle Radio. This week, we pay tribute to Pope Francis.
Francis himself had always said, you don't need legs to run the church, you need a head. And he kept showing his presence even when he was supposed to be convalescing. So he confounded all of us.
Plus, as Canadians are gearing up for an election, Monocle's contributing editor Sheena Rossiter explains why housing will be one of the big issues on the ballot.
Well before the start of the year, there has been a housing crisis in full effect. There is currently a shortfall of 3.1 million homes across the country.
All that and much more in the next hour here on The Curator with me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. And this week, the world's Catholics were in mourning as Pope Francis died on Monday in Rome. Here is an excerpt of our show The Briefing covering the death of Pope Francis. We start with Monocle's Andrew Muller obit.
In the long history of the role he inhabited, Pope Francis was among the very few who got to have any kind of handover conversation with their predecessor. Francis ascended to the throne of St. Peter in 2013 following the resignation of Benedict XVI, only the third pope to stand down ahead of being recalled to barracks by the proprietor. If Benedict, then 86, had hoped to enable the passing of the papacy to a younger generation, he might have been disappointed by the conclave's choice. The white smoke billowed from the Sistine Chapel in honour of a man just 8 years his junior. Jorge Mario Bergoglio was born on December 17, 1936, in Buenos Aires, the son of Italian immigrants. He graduated from a technical secondary school with a diploma in chemistry and prior to finding his vocation worked in a food processing laboratory. After becoming a Jesuit novice, he studied in Chile and Argentina. He was ordained a priest in December 1969. Bergoglio's ascent through the Jesuit hierarchy occurred against a grim backdrop. In 1973, he was appointed Provincial of the Jesuits, effective leader of the order in Argentina. In 1976, Argentina's military seized power. The junta led by Lieutenant General Jorge Rafael Videla took a forbiddingly dim view of the social outreach conducted by some of Bergoglio's fellow Jesuits. Several priests and bishops were among the thousands of people who were tortured, murdered, or, as the gruesome euphemism had it, disappeared during the dictatorship. Some years after democracy was restored in 2000, Argentina's Catholic Church would apologize for its failure to confront the generals, a failure in which, some had it, Bergoglio was complicit, though no evidence was found that would have justified a formal investigation into his activity during this period. In 1992, Bergoglio was appointed an auxiliary bishop of Buenos Aires and in 1998, archbishop of the city. It was in this role that he established himself as a maverick. His modesty and asceticism baffled conservatives. He rejected the official residence for a downtown apartment and ditched his chauffeur for the bus. His hardcore traditionalism enraged liberals, notably in his attempt to hold the church's line against the advent of same-sex marriage. He was, during this period, an outspoken advocate for the poor and a critic of any policy which promoted or permitted, as he saw it, inequality, a message which found an audience at a time when Argentina's economy was foundering. Pope John Paul II created Bergoglio a cardinal in 2001 and, as some saw it, implicitly anointed a successor with a similar combination of compassion for the poor and theological rigour. Bergoglio participated in the conclave which followed John Paul's death in 2005, but the cardinals plumped for the austere figure of Joseph Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict XVI, though only, according to some later reports, after Bergoglio pleaded with some of his own supporters to abandon their campaign so as to ensure a quick succession. It was no great surprise to anyone that Benedict's papacy was short. He was 78 when he was elected. It was a tremendous shock to everyone that he renounced the role voluntarily. Benedict was a doctrinaire hardliner and a supremely unlikely convention flouter. Possibly encouraged by this anarchic outburst, the consequent conclave endorsed Bergoglio as the first Jesuit pope and the first from the Southern Hemisphere. He chose the name Francis after the eponymous saint. Francis signalled from the off that he intended to cut a less ostentatious dash than his predecessors. He abjured much of the ceremonial dress which attends the papacy and preferred the Vatican's guest house to the papal residence in the Apostolic Palace. As Pope, Francis not only seemed more relaxed on some matters than Benedict, which would not have been hard, but more so than himself of years previously. While the church he led remained dogmatically boneheaded on the subject of homosexuality, his famous remark, "Who am I to judge?" was at least forgiving, even if that in itself implied that there is anything to forgive on this front. It may have been that Francis understood that it might be in the Church's interests to give the prurient moralizing a rest, as the scale of institutional child abuse it had long covered up grew clearer. Francis convened a summit and revised canon law to address these monstrosities, but always amid a justifiable clamour for more to be done, and sooner. Francis was a vigorous and enterprising diplomat. He was credited by Cuba for finessing its restoration of relations with the United States, and in 2021 undertook the first papal visit to Iraq, which included a meeting with Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani in the holy Shia city of Najaf. Francis will likely be recalled as a modernizer and reformer, but these things are relative. The Catholic Church remains officially as rigid on such subjects as homosexuality, abortion, and the ordination of women as it was when Jorge Bergoglio took his priestly vows. Pope Francis understood, however, that even, perhaps especially, within such rigid frameworks, conduct and character count for a lot.
Thank you very much, Andrew Muller. And joining us now for more on the Pope's passing is the journalist, broadcaster and former Vatican correspondent, Juliet Linley. And Juliet, as a former Vatican correspondent, let's start with your reactions and reflections.
Chris, it's not as if we weren't prepared for a papal passing. He had been hospitalized in February. He had 2 close brushes with death in the 38 days that he was in hospital. But this morning, it caught us all by surprise. You know, on March 23rd, when he left hospital, the world had been told he'd have to rest for 2 months. Don't expect to see the Pope for the next 8 weeks. He needs to do therapies for his mobility, his voice, for his breathing. That's what we were told. But Francis himself had always said, you don't need legs to run the church, you need a head. And he kept showing his presence even when he was supposed to be convalescing. So he confounded all of us, Chris, by popping up unexpectedly over the last week, which is, as you know, the most important week in Christianity. It's the Holy Week. And he popped up on several occasions, formal and informal, including yesterday, the most important day of the Christian calendar, Christ's resurrection, Easter Sunday. He was wheeled out onto the balcony at St. Peter's Square. He gave the traditional Urbi et Orbi blessing. And once he had done the blessing, he even had a zip around in his Pope mobile to bless the multitudes of pilgrims that had gathered. Chris, this is a holy year. It's a Jubilee year. So there are even more pilgrims flocking to Rome than you usually would have. And there were an estimated 50,000 of them yesterday in Piazza San Pietro and surroundings to see the Pope. So while his health was, poorly and he came close to dying, this was all of a sudden unexpected this morning.
And world tributes have been pouring in for Pope Francis. And as it happened when you mentioned his conversations and appeals to world leaders, J.D. Vance, the U.S. Vice President, was the last leader or vice president to meet him. They held a private meeting yesterday. What do we know of what they spoke about?
That was so unexpected, Chris, because nobody knew whether he was or he wasn't going to meet the Pope, but he did meet on the Saturday, so the day before Easter Sunday. He did meet the Pope's number 2, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, and the foreign minister, Archbishop Paul Gallagher, and they had discussions about their very diverging views on, if you want, migration and immigration. And there had been talk about whether J.D. Vance would or would not get a photo opportunity with the Pope that many thought that he very much craved. And then he got it, which was quite incredible, especially because he was the last leader that the Pope met before he passed away today. But it was such a telling meeting, if you want, because this is America's first ever Republican Catholic vice president. He's one of the highest profile converts. He only converted in 2019. He's only been a Catholic for 6 years. J.D. Vance himself called himself a baby Catholic. He's been having a tough time reconciling Washington's policies, those of Trump, with those of his church. So getting to meet the Pope on the day before he died is so poignant. And as you know, Chris, U.S.-Vatican tensions have been running so high as both Trump and Francis, I mean, they both are very much focusing on refugees and migrants, but on polar opposite ends of the spectrum. You know, Francis had always begged the world's leaders to have mercy on them, to welcome them, and Trump deports and dismisses them.
And Juliet, you speak of U.S.-Vatican tensions. There were also tensions within the Vatican at various points during Francis's papacy. Tell us a little more about those. I guess I wonder to what extent his legacy will have made an imprint in how Rome functions, how the Vatican functions itself.
He leaves an enormous legacy. He's created a lot of change in so many things that he's said, being so perceived as so liberal, if you want. He was at loggerheads with very conservative Catholics, especially American conservative Catholics, who viewed him as far too free and liberal. But, you know, he came to the papacy in 2013 on a mandate to reform Vatican bureaucracy and finances. But then he went so much further, shaking up the church and making so many changes, although he did not change the essence of the church's doctrine. So he approved church blessings for gay couples. He welcomed LGBTQ plus gays into the fold, if you want, saying, "Who am I to judge homosexuals?" He declared the church to be against capital punishment. He called on the possession of nuclear weapons to be deemed immoral. He also, interestingly, he met the Russian Patriarch Kirill in Cuba. That was a breakthrough in ecumenical terms. And he was a great proponent of interfaith dialogue. He met often with leaders of the Muslim world, with leaders of the Jewish world, as well as different factions within the Christian world. And he reaffirmed, however, a lot of things that people had been hoping that he would change. For instance, he still said that women could not be priests, Chris. He also upheld the church's opposition to abortion. Even though he seemed to have a softening towards women who had had abortions, he did not absolutely come out and say that he was pro-choice, not in the least. And he also, if you want to look at the upside, he added women to important roles at the Vatican. But most of all, he promoted dialogue with the poor. He met prisoners, he met migrants, as we said. And as Camerlengo Kevin Farrell, whom we will touch upon right away, because what is the Camerlengo and what is his role right now? As Kevin Farrell, the Irish cardinal, put it, it was about embracing all people, extending the arms of the church to everybody.
Juliet Linley, thank you very much for joining us.
And now let's head to Canada. Canadians are heading to the polls this Monday to elect members of the House of Commons to the 45th Canadian Parliament. And this week we wanted to take this moment to explore how this federal election will impact Canadian cities and what has been going on in the lead-up to the big day at the polls. Well, housing is among the big issues that are on the ballot come election day, and with a national housing shortage and rising cost of living, it's never been more critical to ensure speed to market for the attainable homes. Monocle's contributing editor Sheena Rossiter sent us this report to explain how federal politics and the economy are largely dictating the current urban landscape.
It's been an unavoidable part of daily life in Canada so far this year. Politics.
I've just requested that the Governor-General dissolve Parliament and call an election for April 28th.
Just 9 days after being sworn in as Prime Minister, Mark Carney stood at a wooden lectern that donned a chisel maple leaf on the steps of Rideau Hall, the official residence of the Governor-General of Canada. His call for a snap election is another move in what's been a turbulent 2025 in the world of Canadian politics.
We are facing the most significant crisis of our lifetimes because of President Trump's unjustified trade actions and his threats to our sovereignty. Our response must be to build a strong economy and a more secure Canada.
Carney is unelected. In recent history, the last time there was an unelected prime minister in Canada was John Turner in 1984. This snap election call is seen as a way to get more stability in Canadian politics, regardless of which party will hold power. Canada's parliament has been prorogued since former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau resigned in early January, and with the cost of living and the current housing crisis being top issues on the ballot, Canadians across the country are eager for policies to be put into action.
We're going to get some dinner started here in a couple of minutes.
So how pressing is this issue for home and city builders?
We've got a pretty dynamic couple of speakers here who have traveled great and short distances to be with us tonight to talk about the future of the economy in our city and in Alberta.
Both home and city builders sit down for a banquet dinner in downtown Edmonton. They're all gathered here to get the forecast of the economy and what that means for building desperately needed homes. Well before the start of the year, there has been a housing crisis in full effect. There is currently a shortfall of 3.1 million homes across the country. Nearly half of Canadians report being very concerned about housing affordability because of the rising costs of housing or rent. That's according to Statistics Canada. There are several factors that play into this crisis. A labor shortage is partly to blame, but the discrepancy of how many people would be living in Canada this year didn't help developers and planners when it came to planning cities. Stéphane Marion is the chief economist at the National Bank of Canada, and he explains more.
We've added 3 million Canadians in 3 years in the country. You normally do this over a span of 8 to 10 years, but we haven't built an industrial sector to cope with the increase in population, which forces us to be overly dependent on the rest of the world for some of the products that we need to consume in our country. And I think the manufacturing sector should offer hope that we can redefine our country in order not to jeopardize our economic sovereignty, which is under threat at this point in time. So it's a wake-up moment, I think, for policymakers.
Many newcomers arrived on Canadian soil, and life hasn't been what they imagined it to be. This has led to some new arrivals in the country to return back home. As Stéphane Marion explains, not all aspects of life were looked at when this immigration policy was created.
Well, we broke our social contract when we ran an immigration policy that was very aggressive without building the infrastructure that needed to come with it. So basically we're saying we're trying to poach foreign talent, which is very important for our future economic growth. But you can't find a family doctor, unable to find daycare, try to find a place in school. This is the issue where we brought the people but forgot to build the infrastructure. So by breaking this social contract, I think there will be an overhang. We will pay a price for that. How big a price, we'll see. But certainly some people are frustrated to see that you invited me to your country. I want to be productive, but I can't be productive because you don't even have those key infrastructure. The lifestyle is a whole package. So this is where there was some failure in the immigration policy.
And this population increase is a major pressure point for housing right now. Here's Paul Lanny, president and CEO of Averton, a real estate developer with operations in both Toronto and Edmonton.
The rise in population, the sheer number of houses that are in demand right now is really making this issue larger than it's ever been. We know in conversations with the province that they've made it a priority for the province of Alberta, recently stating that we are 100,000 homes short of what we need just right now, let alone the growth that continues to happen. Alberta, as an individual jurisdiction, has grown 4.4%, which is the largest in the world, the fastest growth in the world. So with that growth, we need housing. We have not built enough housing for the amount of people that have arrived in this province.
Densifying is key. Being able to adapt to higher density is just part of the maturation of a city, says Paul.
Because we have a fixed amount of labor, building less dense housing uses up that labor less efficiently. Put simply, if you're swinging a hammer building a single house or you're swinging a hammer building an 8-plex of row housing, for example, you're creating that much more housing. We're exploring different built forms that get us a greater yield per acre. That's all going to help, because where traditionally we might have built one house, we might be able to build multiple. And I think that's going to create solutions for families, for new arrivals in the province and across the country.
For Paul Lenny, regardless of the election outcome here in Canada or tariffs being imposed by the United States, creating more homes for people to live in, be it newcomers or otherwise, has to remain a priority as Canadian cities continue to grow. Canada's housing crisis will need to be solved regardless of trade wars.
We have to keep building. That's the bigger issue we have to face right now. And there's an opportunity where the amount of households that have been formed over the last few years relative to the amount of housing stock being produced, there's a huge deficit there. We're only building 40,000 houses a year, but we're bringing in hundreds of thousands of people a year.
For Monocle Radio in Edmonton, I'm Sheena Rossiter.
We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research, and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Banking is our craft.
You are listening to The Curator. Now to Bucharest, where this weekend the Romanian capital plays host to a new urbanism event, New Urban Habits. It's the country's first festival focused on the future of cities. Monocle's resident Romanian and senior producer, Lara Kramer, caught up with the organizers to find out more.
In recent years, Bucharest has seen a boom in tourism and rapid growth. But with that expansion comes a set of challenges, from increased traffic congestion to underutilized public spaces and neglected historic buildings. Local urbanists have been calling for fresh ideas to rethink the city's development. This weekend's New Urban Habits Festival aims to facilitate that discussion. The event is organized by Urbanize Hub, a locally based collective working to make cities smarter and more livable places.
Everything started with the Say-Do gap.
That's education expert and human capital strategist Oana Onciu, the project manager of New Urban Habits.
We noticed that everywhere people meet and wear suits and talk about climate change or about building better lives and better cities, but we end up doing a really small percent. And we wanted to address this, even if it's on an experimental way. So New Urban Habits is a big experiment.
Over 2 days, architects, planners, and sustainability experts will gather for public talks and workshops to offer practical solutions for how cities can work better, and even some comedy.
I'm Sami Stancu. I'm the head of Urbanism Division of Urbanize Hub. It's divided by two, the festival. We have the street that we close under the bigger program of the municipality that is called Open Streets. And also we have a private terrain that will be like a garden. It's a cozy speaking corner. We have international speakers, also national entities that are going to present there. And it will be a very complex program, educationally speaking, but also artistically, because we also have 2 acoustic concerts after 6 p.m., DJ sets, and also stand-up comedy. So it's going to be a lot.
The festival has also set an example of collaboration across sectors, bringing together a range of local and international partners. Oana Onchu again.
We started with the idea of bringing multiple stakeholders together, and we end up doubling the number of the people and the domains and the areas.
And with such an impressive list of international partners and stakeholders who are coming, I wondered if there are maybe some takeaways that you think Romanian leaders can adapt from their international counterparts that have really stood out to you.
We have Maria Vasilacu with us, which was the vice mayor of Vienna for 10 years. She implemented things that people from administration, from Romania, for example, can live home with, because there are politics and solutions that were implemented and they were already past the test of time.
Politics is on everyone's mind in Romania. The country is preparing for a presidential election rerun in May, a pivotal moment for its democracy amid allegations of Russian interference in the previous attempt. Here is Bucharest-based journalist Alison Mutler.
Romanians will choose whether they stay on in the European Union and NATO camp, or whether they decide to pursue a more isolationist and independent position. In urban areas, most people would prefer to stay in the European camp.
Diana Dobrin, Sustainable Innovation Lead at Urbanize Hub, says voters are increasingly focused on urban issues like pollution. She tells me sustainability in cities will be a key theme at the new Urban Heights Festival.
The objectives that have been set at an European level on the climate transition are starting to become a reality as well in Romania. And for us, this has been quite an important thing to have all of these topics discussed in the festival in a way that is very approachable and friendly and accessible, and encouraging people to actually be part of the conversation. Within the program itself, mobility, and I guess micromobility more specifically, is a bit of a focus. So because a lot of the times these topics tend to be politicized and tend to be used at more of like a superficial level rather than something that people can actually find relevant and can relate to in their daily lives.
With a full program ready to roll out this weekend, Diana says the team is already looking ahead to the next edition and how the ideas sparked here can inspire what comes next.
For us, this festival is a way to then be able to kickstart other projects, to reach out to maybe audiences and people that have otherwise probably not have heard of us or like what it means to look at like participatory urbanism. But the main focus is also to then go into projects and actual tangible work that we can continue working on in the future.
Europe's decision to rearm and the EU's role in Ukraine is proving a tricky business for Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Her recent good-natured meeting with Donald Trump has proved her vital role as a transatlanticist. But it is a headache back at home, where the atmosphere is very much one of the EU realizing it needs to go it alone. This is crucial for Italy's largest defense company, Leonardo, a company which has enjoyed a big boost in profits recently and has also been forging ahead with strategic partnerships, such as with Germany's Rheinmetall for tank production and Turkey's Baykar for drones. Roberto Cingolani is the CEO of Leonardo, and he recently sat down with our Europe editor-at-large, Ed Stalker, at Leonardo's Rome HQ to talk security, thinking Europe, and Donald Trump.
I think now the point is to be committed, because there's huge global challenge in the defense, and personally I believe defense will soon become an old concept, because we have to shift from defense to global security, and global security means changing completely the technology approach that we have. So in this respect, I've been a scientist most of my life. I do see a fantastic opportunity to develop new technologies to make our society safer. Of course, the geopolitical context is demanding because we need to give the feeling to our citizens that security is guaranteed. And this is not actually the case now, so we have to work hard. The company is doing well because, first of all, there was an increase in the business, obviously, but also because we had a massive injection of new technologies, starting with digitalization, but not only. And I believe that this idea to develop an integrated strategy for multi-domain interoperability, that means all our platforms, land, sea, air, space, should communicate to each other, should be connected in a cybersecure way, supervised by satellites, and decisions should be made by very fast computing capabilities, analyzing data that are collected in real time. So what we call AI, but it's much more complex than AI itself. I believe this is the way we should develop security in the future, and that's why we're all committed in developing this program.
I mean, that's a lot, though, this fully integrated system, and that involves moving into new areas, including space. How far away do you think is that fully integrated reality?
The case of Leonardo is very special. A point of weakness of the company in the past has been to develop massive hardware platforms, so aircraft, helicopters, components for ships, land defense systems, electronics. And when you make hardware rather than software, the margins are low. You need long-term investments. It's very difficult to develop new hardware. So that was a drawback for the company. Now it became a plus. Primarily because if you have the capability to build all platforms in all domains, including satellites and space applications, then the next step is to glue them, to join them by cybersecurity and, of course, advanced communication that have to be cybersecure. And then you need to develop cloud capability, high-performance computing capability to have a decision-making process which is AI-driven. So the most difficult part, actually, was to have the platforms. And this we already have in our DNA. So now implementing the rest, so the space part, the AI part, the digital part, it's, maybe I should not say easier, but definitely more favorable than starting from scratch, building hardware platforms. How far we are, I think in this decade we'll see a lot of progress.
How ambitious is Leonardo?
The point of view that I have is that no one can make it on its own. I was very clear with the investors when I introduced last year the industrial plan. So, on one hand, Leonardo has a very strong position because, as I said before, we do all the hardware, we develop all the AI, we develop cybersecurity, we're now investing in space. So, we have most of the components of the puzzle. However, in order to be self-sufficient, you should be gigantic. Look at the competitors in US, they are 60, 100 billions or so. We are 20 billions. In Europe, the size of the big defense companies is slightly smaller than in US. So I don't think the right choice is aiming at being totally self-sufficient, aiming at being the one company show. On the contrary, we have to make alliances. We have to create European giants that exploits the synergy among different defense companies. Means giving up for something in your domestic market, replacing this with some portion of the global market. So we have to do our best to grow on one hand, but on the other hand, we have to do our best to create alliances. What we did with Rheinmetall, we did with for the GCAP, and with Baykar for the drones. That's an effort. We should abandon the idea of the national defense in favor of a continental defense, and as such, we should be competitive to the other continents. So the fractional market that we can target is by far bigger than what we have in our individual member states. Of course, this requires fair play, a reasonable approach, technical analysis done in a serious way, somehow no domestic approach to the discussion, but just thinking in a continental way. I like to think European, I don't like to think Italian.
You've said in the past, fairly recently, that you don't think it's the US's role to protect Europe. Have you been pleased with the reaction from the European Union and other countries, including the UK, who are looking to up defence spending and essentially rearm?
I've been living in the United States and I've been working there. I have a brother working there. I like US and I believe that this is not US against Europe. Let's be very clear. The American taxpayer said, we don't want to pay our taxes to defend Europe for problems that Europe has at its border. And this is reasonable, no? On the other hand...
Trump said that or the taxpayers said that?
I think this is a common sense of the taxpayer in the US, okay? I would say in the sock of the taxpayer, and I would say, why do we pay so much money to defend another continent? On the other hand, of course, Mr. Trump said this in a very colorful way, but I believe this is a reasonable argument without any ideology behind, okay? Just common sense. Again, in common sense, in Europe, they say, okay, we're the second investor in global defense, very likely, as a procurement, But in the end of the day, most of our money, again, of the taxpayer, is going to buy American platforms. So I think the reason is just in the middle. We should invest more. So if we invest more, we should have more European products. So we have to create wealth in Europe. And the reason is not to compete the competition between US and Europe. That would be a stupid thing. The reason is that under the NATO umbrella, you need two legs. And the two legs have to be comparable because we have to be more reliable and stronger partner in the NATO alliance to defend our security. And this is an interest for us, but also for the Americans to have a stronger NATO, which is defending actually the Western way of life. So if you consider this in a very constructive way, it could be win-win.
It's also a slightly strange situation for you, perhaps, in a way, because global instability, Russia, China, wars also are good for business, for Leonardo.
You see, this is the simplest approach to the business of defense, to my opinion. And everybody, by common sense, is saying the same.
But it's not, you can't deny you profit from global insecurity.
Of course, because we are in defense. This is pretty much like during the COVID, people were making profit by the antibacterial and the antivirus masks. And this is unfortunately life. However, I like to see slightly longer term. Right now there is a peak. But let me tell you frankly, if tomorrow all the conflicts in the planet will shut down, there is 59 conflicts at the moment. So the question is, tomorrow we all hope Ukraine war to finish. So what do you think? That the investors will not invest anymore in defense? So for me, the investment in defense will be reduced, but the investment in security must grow. In the future, you will see security will include energy security, food security, infrastructure security. There will be always need of security. And I think we should stop thinking that we invest in weapons. We invest in security. I'm ready to stop producing war aircraft if finally the governments will understand that security goes through energy security, cybersecurity, and so on and so forth. The point is we have to intercept the technology needs that every era, every period of our history needs. This is what defense and security must do. We are beneficial now of the fact that there is a war because we are selling weapons. This is the very simple equation. But tomorrow the war will finish. We will not sell weapons. So somebody believes that there will be no need of security? I don't think so.
And now we have a highlight from The Stack, our show about magazines. It was a pleasure talking to Gert Jonkers, co-founder and editor-in-chief of Fantastic Man. The magazine is celebrating 2 decades.
It feels festive and it feels like going all out. I mean, that's what the fun of making 10 covers is. But indeed, it's the first time we did it. I mean, occasionally we used to have the same person twice in like a black and white and a color picture, or Kyle MacLachlan with his eyes closed and open. So there were sort of slight variations where we had like multiple, that's what we called our multiple covers. But indeed, now we thought there's also so many amazing people in this issue, I think, from, Haider Ackermann. Rupert Everett is back. He was on the first issue of Fantastic Man, and we thought let's put him on the cover again. Rocco Ritchie, Adrian Brody. So there's lots of amazing people. Carlos Alcaraz, maybe my favorite cover, actually. It's hard to choose. As you probably know from being involved in a magazine too, it's hard to sort of make a decision. What do you call your lead story? Are you doing the other stories a disservice? So yeah, we did them all.
But as always, and I have to be honest, say here on air, my favorite cover is Rocco Ritchie. And the thing that made me smile when I saw that cover is that you guys are different. I mean, I have to say, sometimes you take some risks, and I think you usually pay it off in a way. Of course, there are people, that there will be on the cover of Fantastic Man. But even I, as a reader, I was a little bit surprised in a very good way.
Yeah, well, I mean, yes. That's a joy for us for doing it. I mean, sort of there's nothing more boring than doing the expected. It's always this fine line. You can't reinvent yourself every 6 months, and you don't want to reinvent yourself every 6 months because you also have your own taste and your own take on things. But you have to surprise yourself, and therefore you have to surprise other people.
Would you agree with me, Het, that Fantastic Man, it's a magazine for those who enjoy clothes and the small details? It's not necessarily about, sure, you go to Milan, you go to Paris, of course, you follow what's happening in the world of fashion, but it's really much an appreciation of clothing, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, definitely, we've always sort of admired clothes more than we've admired fashion. I see it at home for myself. It's I'm actually struggling with the amount of clothes I have at the moment because I love clothes so much. And I'm not, I'm not a terrible fashion victim and I don't buy a lot of clothes, but I never get rid of anything. I think if a pair of Dries van Noten jeans was nice 12 years ago, it's actually still nice. And even though weirdly sometimes the cut really gets out of fashion, and that's the moment where I sort of like put it in my storage, but it will probably come back in 5 or 10 years' time. So yes, we like clothes, but then I really think Fantastic Man also likes people. I think that's for me still the main basis for the magazine. I think, one of my favorite stories in this issue is the story of the man in seat 61, which is this website. Do you know the website? It's this man from Britain who has a website about train travel, train travel everywhere. And it's incredibly detailed. I actually used it last week because I went from Amsterdam to Milan, and you type that in, and it comes with all the different possibilities of getting from Amsterdam to Milan in 17 hours or 13 hours or 12 hours, and tells you exactly where you can get a sandwich, on which train there is hot coffee, or whether there is an actual restaurant, or which transfer is too short. And it's a beautiful story that it's also always very important to us to find these people that are just fascinating and have nothing to do with fashion.
Absolutely. I think that also brings the magic of the magazine. So was there any kind of particularly issue that you love it and you keep it as, I was telling you before the interview that the Tom Ford one was my very first Fantastic Man. So I'll always remember that one, and the David Beckham one, which is the one I was working with you guys in Amsterdam. Is there a special one, or you're someone who always likes to look at the future?
No, there are issues that I love. I love the one with Helmut Lang on the cover.
Oh, yes.
I thought that was great. But then I also love the one with Brian Ferry on the cover, just because when I was young, when I was 7, 8, 9 years old, actually my first album that I ever bought was Let's Stick Together from Brian Ferry. And Brian Ferry was my hero as a child. So to have him on the cover was incredible. There's an amazing cover of Jonathan Anderson that we did for issue number 21, I think. It's also very dear to me. So there are a lot of issues. It's easier to think about the past than about the future, obviously, because how are we gonna top this doorstopper of an issue? I don't know yet, but we're slowly starting to think about that.
No, absolutely. And I wonder if there are any highlights of this issue. Of course, we're talking about the 10 covers, so there's plenty of profiles to read. But I wonder if there's anything else. Did you decide to look back at the history, some of your contributors, some like a best-of type of thing?
Well, we tried not to make it too nostalgic, this issue, because that would have been quite easy to do. But I think in a way, the only really nostalgic story inside this issue is the fact that Rupert Everett makes a return in the issue. But we did make a little supplement, which is 20 dream covers. And that is, it sort of looks at all the covers we didn't have in the past. Because we only chose one very often, and there was often another story or another image of the same cover story that we thought could also have been a very nice cover. So through this booklet, that's a supplement, we're also telling the history of the 20 years a little bit, because we're looking back at, Tom Brown in the first issue, or Luca Guadagnino, or Shane Oliver. So it's a little bit of a retelling of our history.
And finally, here on The Curator, we head to Mexico for the latest episode of Food Neighborhoods.
The sun is peeking through the branches as I walk through Plaza Rio de Janeiro, past Mexico's own replica of the Statue of David. I'm making my way to Birria, Jalisco, where you'll find some of the best birria tacos in Mexico City. Mexico City has a vibrant street food culture with over 75% of the population dining out at least once a week. It's accessible, steeped in history, and for the most part, incredibly high quality. Traditionally, birria comes from the state of Jalisco, made with goat's meat, and the earliest recipes were crafted by indigenous communities there. José Manuel has been serving tacos to tourists and locals here in Roma Norte for over 30 years. Birria de res, or beef birria, has evolved from this tradition, and is what José Manuel serves me with a hot side of consommé broth, which he serves smothered over the tacos.
Es que es muy laboriosa, sí, por eso nos visitan. Sí, no es nada más de que la he hecho ahí, ya no.
Jose Manuel tells me it's a laborious process. It takes several hours for beef to become tender and flavourful, typically 3 to 4, or even longer. He says that's why people come here. He makes all his salsas by hand. Chile de árbol is a spicy Mexican salsa made with dried árbol chilies, known for their heat and earthy flavour. Jose makes it with a bit of habanero for added spice. Sitting next to me is a couple listening in on the conversation. They tell me they've been coming here for more than 10 years.
El sabor que tiene aquí no hay aquí cerca. Sí, y además es muy agradable estar bien.
She says the flavour here is unlike any around. Jose's own combination of traditional birria spices, which involves a blend of black peppercorns, bay leaves, cinnamon, cumin, plus his welcoming charm, has kept them coming back. As I leave Jose Manuel's charm and his devoted regulars, I head to one of Roma's many cherished but perhaps most unique cafes, Post. Mexico is a major coffee-producing country, with coffee coming from regions like Chiapas, Veracruz and Oaxaca. But outside of Mexico, the country has had a reputation of being poorer quality than some of its Latin American counterparts.
The world is starting to pay attention that some of the best coffee is coming from Mexico.
Miguel, founder and co-owner of Post, is trying to help change that in a city where there is an ever-growing interest and demand in specialty coffee.
You find a lot of coffees here that are super similar to African coffees or Colombian coffees, and it's new to everyone, outside of Mexico. You get a lot of expressive coffees from Mexico, and it's not these caramelly, chocolatey coffees. You could find very fruity, herbal coffees, kind of like the one that you're drinking today. We just came back from the Danish Coffee Festival, and then this year we were invited by the SCA in Denmark to attend, which was really nice, because we also they sort of sponsored our tickets, so we didn't have to pay.
Even better.
Yeah, exactly. So they invited us, and we went, and it's nice because we were the only Mexican, or the only people from outside of Europe that had a booth. And people are paying attention to Mexico as like the next Peru, and so you're starting to see it, but it's still not.
It's not quite there.
It's not quite there.
Post specialises in light roast coffee, which means trying to develop the coffee in a way that doesn't create too much smokiness in the flavour.
And I think the best way to think about it is like bread. It's like if you toast your bread, you could toast it so much that it creates this layer of black sort of burntness on your bread, and if you taste it, it's going to be so overwhelming to your palate, right? Because it has this like charred taste and flavor. And with light roast, the idea is like roasting the coffee in such a way that you develop it correctly, but you don't get those off flavors, so you only taste the, where the coffee comes from, how fermentation process, all of this stuff, to try to get a very clean, balanced, taste.
That's something I definitely need to try.
Yeah?
Should we go and try it?
Yeah, let's go and try it.
Yeah, cool.
But so we use these very nice grinders from an Australian brand called Optional, and they're very big burrs. We love the flavor that they make. Our style in espresso, it's like we're quite coarse on how we grind coffee, and we try to extract as much as possible from the bean. So we do a lot of experiments to try to get the best flavor out of it. But we found that we're actually, for our style of roasting, we're pulling espressos, in 6 seconds. We also have a machine that's called a slayer, and it allows us to change the pressure as you extract the coffee, which is really nice because a lot of coffees that we get that maybe have a higher gas content, we need to degasify so that maybe it's not so bitter, remove some of the bitterness. So it really allows us to control the extraction. And for this recipe that we have for this specific espresso, we're not using any post-infusion, and we're extracting it pretty high. So that was 10 seconds for this espresso. Yeah, that's that.
Is that one? Can I try that one?
That's it.
Beautiful.
Is it like it?
You're right, I hadn't tasted an espresso like that before. That is utterly delicious.
Thanks. Yeah, I love it. I'm obsessed with it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Where does the coffee come from that you get? What's the sort of process of it literally coming to this shop?
For us, in terms of where we find coffee is we work with one family right now in Oaxaca. When you go to the farms, you realize how hard it is to get coffee and the process that it takes to harvest it and ferment it and everything, getting to the up until the roastery. It's so important to have high consistency with preparing it because we know how difficult it is to make it. And we know the families that make these coffees, right? It's like we know the dogs' names of the owners of the farms, right? It's like it's very important for us to do the best job that we can because the families that depend on us are, very close to us. This is a shop where it's an owner-operated shop and it's a co-op. So it's like me and the other guy that works here is a barista, but he's also the owner. And we're very passionate about what we do, and we work here every single day. And it's going to remain this. It's a big part of the project for us to work in the space and do our best to brew the coffee really well, roast the coffee really well, and have high consistency. It's like I think the thing that people walk away with is we're very passionate about this project.
Post, which attracts coffee enthusiasts from around the world, is firmly situated in the community, supporting and promoting Mexican coffee while bringing something new to the scene. Before I head out of Roma, I quickly have time to stop by one of Roma's most cherished and now Instagram famous spots, Jenny's Quesadillas. Although Jenny ran out of flor de calabaza, which is a pumpkin flower quesadilla, I did get my mushroom quesadilla. As I eat, I watch Jenny simultaneously cook 20 orders, waving and greeting almost every other passerby. It's here where Roma's balance of global appeal with its neighbourhood soul really come into play. At 11 a.m. every day, locals and visitors flock here to queue for one of Jenny's blue masa quesadillas. Cooked fresh in front of you, here it feels like Jenny's created an opportunity as people of all nationalities wait in line, eat and chat, sprawled out on the streets of Roma. For Monocle, in Mexico City, I'm Verity DeCarla.
And that's all we've got time for this week's edition of The Curator. The show was produced by San Impi and presented by me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Join us again next week, and thank you very much for listening.